a sure thing. Change, change. Expect a miracle change. Watch me change when you change the way you look at things. The things you look at change. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Now do 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 change. Do 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 change. Do 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 change. Do 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 do.
Good afternoon and welcome to Spirit Cafe Show. I'm Barbara Jean,
And I'm Cheryl.
and this is Spirit Cafe Show here on the New Thought Media Network, and we are delighted that you've decided to join us. This is the place of courageous conversations. Cheryl, would you like to give us a land acknowledgement?
Yes, be my honor. Okay. We work, live, and play on the historical and traditional territory of many First Nations. And as we gather on Turtle Island, we as settlers are grateful for the opportunity to meet here. And we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years, including the Métis, Inuit, and all other Indigenous peoples. We also acknowledge that as we continue to grow and expand on these lands, there is still unresolved and dangerous inequality and discrimination towards our BIPOC, BIPOC, and 2S LGBTQ plus families. By making these acknowledgements, we strive to be allies and take an active part in reconciliation. We recognize our oneness, we realize our history, and we choose to create a new reality because we are one.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. And our guest today is Suzanne Paddock. She is the executive director of the Toronto People with AIDS Foundation, and she has some great information about what's happening in the world of HIV and AIDS, but also refugees, homelessness. Okay, the list is long. This woman is a wealth of information, and I'm so delighted she has agreed to join us today. And we're going to be talking more about HIV. Suzanne, welcome.
Thank you so much, Barbara Jean and Cheryl. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful to have you.
We're glad you're here. So the whole HIV crisis, AIDS, it's over, right?
Well, here's what I would say in response to that HIV is no longer a death sentence for people who acquire it, but
Right.
It is still a matter of life and death for every single person living with HIV.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, if people living with HIV don't have access to HIV medications, to safe, affordable housing, to people that love them, to medical care, to food, and to a decent income, then absolutely HIV is a matter of death. So HIV is still here. It is still a thing. And it is infecting and affecting more and more Black, Indigenous, people who use drugs, women, all the folks in our society who are highly marginalized, and continues also to affect the 2S LGBTQ communities.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. And one of the reasons that I'm excited that we have you as a guest is because when Barbara mentioned you and your organization, I thought this is a good opportunity to talk about the fact that although we don't see much about AIDS anymore in our media, in our environment, which we did so much at one time, it hasn't gone away. And it's not any less even. It's just that there are some life-giving medications.
That's
And
right.
so-
Quality of life is just for somebody who has HIV, the quality of life is really difficult. I have lots of friends who are living with it, and it's, yeah, the medication prevents the death, but there's still lots of health challenges that come along with it.
Yeah, I think for me, I'd like to speak about the fact that it hasn't gone away and just how prevalent it is in our society.
What I think is so fascinating about the AIDS epidemic, for folks who were alive in the 1980s, we remember we were impacted, we lost people. That was a time of tremendous, tremendous fear. The stigma that was created around HIV was really the belief that it was transmissible in the air through contact, through brief contacts. And, there was a real primal fear, I think, that the AIDS epidemic set off in society at large, because when it first came on the scene, people didn't understand what it was. They just thought that, quote unquote, men were dying, right? And they didn't understand how it was being transmitted and how to stop it. And so, when we think back to the 80s and that massive, I would say, psychic disruption that the AIDS virus created in society, it really helps to understand, why we don't want to pay attention to it right now. Because for, I would say, two reasons. One is it really scared the hell out of people.
It did. Yeah.
And number two is, there is this belief that the people who did get HIV, once folks started understanding that, it was transmitted through anal sex or through intravenous drug use where needles were being shared, I was like, oh, okay, well, they get what they deserve. So people don't want to see HIV. People don't want to see AIDS. And I think, for people of our generation, I think it's the fear and it's the enormous stigma around, well, people get what they deserve. I think with the younger folks who didn't grow up in the AIDS epidemic, the medication makes it seem like, well, you just take a pill. It's all fine and dandy. In fact, now, with PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, you can take a pill and it'll prevent you from getting HIV.
Wow.
So why should young people be afraid of it?
Yeah.
And I think when I hear that, it makes me a little bit nervous, because I knew a number of people who died of HIV. And so when I hear young people go, oh, well, it causes me pause right away, because really it's still a huge concern, and it's impacting a lot of people, and it's affecting the ability to work, because if your health is bad, you're not going to be able to hold a job. Just the way you get around in society. I see so many people who are living with this, who are, sitting on their little mobile scooters because they can't walk well. So they need assistance in many ways. So I think there's a lot going on with it that people aren't really thinking about. And then as we have more immigrants coming into the country, especially the refugees from the African countries and stuff, there's a great deal of people coming in who have HIV as well, and how we deal with that. So PWA is a great resource for immigrants, for people living with HIV. Can you talk a little bit about the work that is done at PWA for people with HIV?
Absolutely. I mean, so we've been around since 1987. We were formed during the AIDS crisis. We, at the time in 1987 here in Toronto, were the only organization exclusively focused on people living with HIV. And I say that because so much of the response at the time was HIV prevention. What I say is keeping HIV negative people negative, but not focusing on supporting HIV positive folks. So that's why we were created. We were created to offer very tangible, practical support services, things like food and financial assistance, in part because at the time, and I keep referencing the AIDS epidemic because it really helps to contextualize why we were created, because people didn't have long to live. So the benefits had to be immediate. You know, it really, I remember hearing the story from one of our early staff members who said that, back in the day, someone would come in and donate and hand over a check, and staff members would just turn it right over, endorse it, and hand it over to a community member because people were dying very, very quickly.
Mhm.
Now, knowing that HIV is no longer a death sentence, still the emphasis is HIV is a matter of life and death. So despite the fact that folks are not dying like they did in the 80s and 90s before the advent of the medications, food and financial assistance continue to be an enormous support for people living with HIV who are struggling and living below the poverty line, living on disability in particular, or part of the working poor. I mean, at this point, I've worked at PWA for 20 years, and I can say from the vantage point of being at this organization for 20 years, people are far worse off now
Mm.
than they were 20 years ago because of the cost of living. So we still provide food through what we call our food bank, which we call the Essentials Market. We still provide financial assistance. Many of the services that we started off with, we continue to provide. We help people connect to HIV medications. We help people get access to family doctors and other forms of medical care. We help people get insurance. We help people get onto the government assistance programs. At the same time, we also offer things like haircuts. We provide complementary therapies free of charge. And we also give opportunities for people to come and serve and be a part of their community and give back, which is actually a huge ethos of the HIV movement.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's really great. So so necessary, right? Even though you started when you did, like you said, in response to the really dire situation, then the services you provide today are still so necessary, and it sounds like has evolved and been built on to actually expand what's needed into today's day and age.
Yeah.
So
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and as Barbara was referencing, right now, the city of Toronto is experiencing a newcomer crisis. I mean, we can see it everywhere we go. Folks
Yeah.
are Black folks. Let's be real. Black folks
Yeah.
are sleeping on the street, right? People are sleeping in tents and encampments. And a lot of these folks are completely new to Canada, come with very little, right? And have no place to go, no family supports to rely on, and are also living with HIV. So their medications are disrupted, right? If folks don't take their medications regularly, it can result in dire health consequences. So, PWA has seen since COVID and that there is an enormous amount of Black people from African countries, as well as Latinx folks coming from South American countries, coming to Canada to pursue a life of freedom and authenticity, and really finding that, the Canada that they imagined and hoped for is not at all what they're experiencing.
Right.
And so, PWA becomes a part of the response to help folks get established, get connected, right? Get connected to medical care, get connected to food, get connected to housing, so that they can set them on a trajectory so that they can live the life that they've dreamed of and supported. But if you don't support folks in that tender time, then all could really be lost, right? And I can't even imagine the fortitude of leaving everything behind. I mean, one person said to me, a Black woman who decided to transition when she came to Canada said, leaving my home was fundamentally the hardest decision I've ever had to make, right? I had to leave behind my job. I had to leave behind my family. I had to leave behind everything that I loved. And this person, she's been living in a shelter for a year. And I can't even imagine the fortitude it takes every day to get up and try to get a start on the life that she had imagined.
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest things I've noticed in speaking to different members of our community at PWA, that they are coming to this country with one vision of what that is, and then being stuck with the reality that here I am and I can't work at the moment,
Right.
so I can't earn any money. Housing is
That's right.
extremely expensive. And so without work and anything, how do I do this? What I love about PWA is it's become a place for them to be.
Mhm.
You know, they get kicked out of the shelter in the morning. Well, they can come down to PWA and they can,
Mhm.
you know, do various activities there to
Yeah.
assist in the work that's being done, which
Mhm.
is wonderful. So many of them are volunteering. But it's really hard to watch these beautiful people
Yeah.
not
I
having
think,
a home.
yeah, and I think it's really important that we share here that these are people who are coming here because either being themselves in their own countries is illegal, or they're running away from persecution, from abuse. A lot of Black women basically are subservient to their husbands no matter what. They have no say. A lot of Black women are raped, you know. So it's not that these people are just coming here because they've got AIDS and want a better life. People need to realize that this is a much larger societal issue, and it's got to do with culture and just so many different things. It's more complex, you know, than I think what most of us realize. And I think it's important that we have these conversations so that people can hear that and can, you know, think about that.
Absolutely. And you know, I would say that there's a large percentage of folks who are coming here that don't know that they're HIV positive and find out
Mm-hmm.
the immigration process or become infected when they come to Canada. So it really is those three scenarios. Folks may be positive in coming, but for those reasons, gender violence, queer violence,
Yeah.
in their home countries. And I think we, you know, what we really have to give pause to, I think particularly for those folks, you know, who identify as white, is that colonialism set that in action, right?
Yes.
Like, you know, hundreds of years ago, when my ancestors, right, decided that they needed more opportunity, they went into Africa and created the conditions that now folks are coming to Canada. So, you know, it's a really a very layered. There's a very recent historical context, and there's also the deeper historical context. So,
Mm-hmm.
our cycle of connection and our degrees of separation are really spun around the colonial actions that took place, you know, several hundred years ago up until today, right? We see it
Mm-hmm.
in, you know, as my colleagues remind me all the time, in the prison system, in the policing system, in the school systems, et cetera. So yes, people come with intersectional realities and most of the time have experienced significant trauma, and are given some of the most difficult situations, circumstances to rebuild their lives from.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible what people can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would also say what is the beauty of the HIV movement, that it has always been built on the involvement of people living with HIV. Now, you know, in some examples, people living with HIV might have not been as meaningfully involved as they should. But when we look at an organization like PWA that was created by 3 gay men living with AIDS in 1987, all of whom died by 1991, they didn't make it as far as the medications, before the medications came out.
Mm-hmm.
But they were the ones who created this organization. And just as Barbara Jean said, the folks that are coming to PWA now are not coming here, you know, with that classic charitable perspective, like, oh, well, folks just want a handout because
Mm-hmm.
they're lazy, they're not educated, you know, all the ignorance there. You know, they're coming here with incredible backgrounds and can do incredible amount of work, right? And they're creating a very thriving community here at PWA. I had a conversation just on Monday with someone who is a community member of ours who wanted to meet me and sat down and told me that they are a newcomer from Afghanistan. I could see they had a visible disability. They talked to me about how all of their family is living under the oppressive Taliban regime, that the women in their family cannot go to school, and they are struggling to find a job because they need to give money back to their family. I mean, so you know, we really have to give pause when we think about the enormous stress that newcomers are coming with on top of living with HIV and facing all the challenges that they have here, and also the pressures to take care of their family members back home. Because, you know, there really is this belief that when folks come to Canada, there's so much economic opportunity, you know, and that this needs to be funneled back as quickly as possible. But folks are finding that they're living in destitution.
Mm-hmm.
can't find jobs, right?
Mhm.
And so how do you maintain your sense of resiliency in the face of all of those challenges? And you know, in part you do that because you're a part of a community
Mhm.
like PWA that cares and values each other and lifts each other's up and understands what everyone is going through and is really that bedrock of support so that folks can live their authentic selves and go out and live the life that they dreamed of.
Right. Yeah.
It's hard to watch some of the immigration stuff, and I don't know what the answer is there other than immigration reform. But I know there's a couple of women who have come, and their children are still back
Oh yeah.
wherever they left from,
Yeah.
and they're here. And until they get their status,
That's right.
they can't even apply for their children to come,
That's right.
and that could take years.
It does. It
And
does.
I,
That for me is inhumane.
I think so. Yeah.
It sounds so inhumane. Like I could never imagine that. Right?
And it's very real. I mean, you know, as we talk about the focus of women, right? This is the reality. It is so common that, you know, women who migrate for a better life have to leave behind their children and at sometimes for years, right? And you know, I've been speaking with one woman over the last year about, you know, this very situation, and the heartbreak that her children are going through, you know, not having their mother and the pain that she has to live with every day. And I, you know, I can think of another woman who had to leave behind one child, and the child would, whenever she spoke to them on the phone, like, "Why have you left me? Why have you abandoned me?" You know, so I can't even imagine what that would be like as a mother to have to make that choice. But clearly, you know, women are being propelled to make incredibly difficult,
Yeah.
ultimately for the betterment of their children, right? I mean, this is why they're having to do this. And I mean, I would agree that it is humane that families are separated because of the immigration laws.
Mm.
And I don't know how those get changed. You know, I think red tape in the government tends to be cut lengthwise rather than across the width, which is a slow process. But when I look at human rights, I think it's a basic human right that children be with their mother uh, in a situation like that. If mom is coming here and if mom has been accepted into the country, her children should be able to fly in immediately.
Absolutely.
There should not be, yeah, well, when we finally give you your status, then you can think about applying for them.
Yeah.
Doesn't
Yeah.
mean they're coming in right away, but we'll start the
Yeah.
process. And I look at how vast Canada is. We have a big, big country. And yes, Southern Ontario has a lot of people in it. But
Mhm.
you know what? The prairies do not,
Mm.
right? Like there's a lot of land, there's a lot of space, there's a lot of opportunity here. And yet somehow we're not funneling those options in a way that really supports the needs of the people that are here.
Mhm. Mm.
And, you know, when I get a little caught up when I look at, you know, these little tent cities that we have.
Mhm.
And I think, why are people having to live that way when we've got all of these little strip malls and stuff? They're completely vacant,
Mhm.
right? COVID shut down all these businesses. These buildings are sitting empty.
Mhm.
Why can't the city sit back and say, look, we're going to give you incentives to turn these into small apartments to house these people while we try to work out a long-term thing? Like, isn't the simplest answer probably the best one or the easiest one? I don't know. If
Well,
people are homeless, give them a home.
Mhm.
right. I mean, and you know, as a colleague of mine was just reminding me that, you know, Indigenous people who are living in some of these encampments are getting fined and jailed for living on their land.
Wow.
You
Like,
know,
how is that just?
Yeah.
right?
I
Yeah.
mean, how asleep do you have to be to do that? Like,
Yeah.
what kind of blinders do you have on that you could actually sit back with an Indigenous person and say you don't have the right to be here?
That's right. That's
Mhm.
right. Well, yeah, I mean, they have to be blind in order to do that. You couldn't be aware of the gravity of that and still go through with it. I would,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
Wow.
yeah.
Man-made laws that have just been around forever, and just because they've been around forever, they stay there, which is ridiculous, right? We've come so far. I mean, even recognizing the atrocities that were done to Indigenous people in Canada's recent past, and things like that. That when we recognize that and we're trying to make amends, why aren't we changing those laws?
Well, it's a scarcity mindset, right? Like if I let women and their children into Canada, what am I going to lose, right?
Mhm.
If I can see that this is Indigenous territory, what am I going to lose? It's the scarcity mindset that thinks that, if we dismantle these structures, then
Mhm.
ultimately the people who benefit from them are
Mhm.
actually going to be disadvantaged. That really keeps them in place, right? And
Mhm.
I mean, I think this really goes to the heart of thinking about social movements, and there's no one solution,
Mhm.
but I the thinking really is that the social movements of the past got us so far because they focused on the external environment, but really if we
Mhm.
want to enact change, it starts with the self, right? and
Mhm.
and really emancipating these systems that we've internalized in our own being, and so
Mhm.
that we do actually start to question and not just carry orders or follow
Right.
through with orders.
Right. And we have to be willing to learn. We have to be willing to understand and to know that we don't know.
Mhm.
Right.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that at PWA, as we've been on our own journey to dismantle anti-Black racism, colonialization, the fear that it brings up that, well, as white people in power, what
Mm.
are we going to lose?
Mm.
Right?
Mm.
And
How about
I
what are
mean,
we going to gain?
well, exactly. And I think the thing that I would say is it is the opposite, right?
Mhm.
That
Mm.
everything that we've done and created to dismantle anti-Black racism and colonialization ultimately has been for the greater of the entire community. I mean, and one example I would say is that with the newcomer crisis, folks were needing the most basic of household essentials like sheets, winter clothing, bedding, towels, etc. And we just started asking around, hey, do you have this? Do you have that? And from that
Mm.
came, what we call a boutique, which is,
Yeah.
is a shop where people can come, anybody can come
Mm.
and take what they need, clothing, household goods, even furniture. Um,
Mm.
and this is not exclusive to newcomers, right? But it came out of the need of supporting newcomers.
Right.
The
Right.
other thing that I would say is, we're looking at dismantle colonialism and anti-Black racism within our financial assistance program, and
Mhm.
really thinking about the enormous barriers that we as a charity had put up, thinking that we were a good social work charity trying to be equal,
Mm.
which is equality is often just a mask for white equity.
Yeah.
And so in dismantling the barriers that we ourselves had created, it doesn't just serve Black people or Indigenous people, it actually serves everybody. And so,
Mm.
I think it is the scarcity mentality that
Mhm.
really blocks white culture from
Mhm.
wanting to topple these systems.
Right.
I agree. And even talking about them, I purchased the book Me and White Supremacy and thought, I'd love to do a book study.
Mhm.
I just wonder if anybody's going to come.
Yeah,
Yes. I've talked to some people that I'm very close to
Mhm.
yeah.
and mentioned, doing this work, and they go, "Oh, well, I didn't have anything to do with that. I'm not racist. I don't have any of that going on." And it's that, you know, I'm not even willing to look at the possibility that I might have something
Mm.
underneath that I may not be fully aware of.
Mhm.
Nope, don't got that, didn't
Yeah.
participate. I don't have to worry about the indigenous stuff because I wasn't one of the people who landed here
Yeah.
and created this.
Yeah.
I'm good. I'm exempt. And that attitude is a bit of a problem.
Well,
And
that's what I mean. We don't know what we don't know, right?
don't know what we don't know. So I just keep gently sort of posing questions going, and what
Yeah.
about this or that? But there's a great resistance. And I remember having, well, actually, it was a couple of years ago at the Unity conference when we had a speaker come in who talked about the racism and stuff and said the only people who can be racist are white people. And of course, everybody in the Zoom room was white, pretty much. I think probably 99% were white. And when this woman said this, it was like I was waiting for the Zoom call to kind of drop, people to walk out of the room. But no one did. No one did. And I think they heard what she said. Is the reason why is because white people are the only ones who, through their prejudice, are actually going to benefit. So it comes back to that benefit, right?
Yeah.
And we don't always think about that.
Yeah.
Who benefits from it? Yeah, that would be us.
Yeah.
So we need to take a little commercial break here. We're at our halfway point. Man, things are flying today. You're watching Spirit Cafe show. Our wonderful guest, Suzanne Paddock, who is the executive director for the Toronto People with AIDS Foundation, PWA. But we'll be back in just a minute, so don't go away.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hepperlin Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Spiritual Center, Kitchener, Om Center for Spiritual Living, La Mesa, Satya Center, Center for Spiritual Living, North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and Center for Spiritual Living, Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for making New Thought Media Network a place to be. Please. New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Welcome back. Barbara Jean had to step out of the room for a moment, but she'll be back shortly. So Suzanne, this has been really a fascinating and deep conversation. It's a deep issue, I feel. So we sort of touched on the constructs of colonialism. And I wonder if we can talk a little bit more about that. What do we mean when we say constructs of colonialism?
Colonialism really was a worldview that white European nations had, several hundred years ago about essentially going into other sovereign nations, and by force, and extracting the resources within those home countries, or including the people themselves, and bringing it back to the white nations, for the betterment of the the white people there. So what happened then is, in order for those colonialist structures to be perpetuated, white culture had to set up a whole institutionalize their governance within those communities, those countries, and established by force, right? Sometimes, of course, slavery, and really focus in on convincing the home populations that white culture was superior, that white people were more intelligent, and in fact that Black people were not even considered fully to be human, and that was the only way that colonialism could really be perpetuated and congruent with Christianity, right? Was the belief that essentially, Black and Indigenous people were savages, that and this was for their own benefit. So, this system of invading countries, bringing in people, taking resources, continues, to this day. And when I think about colonialism within the Toronto People with AIDS Foundation, it first and foremost, it really is, okay, well, how do the services at PWA benefit first and foremost white men, right? White people in general. How are we surveilling PWA to make sure that people are acting in line, and that we're also conveying the message of what good social work, good charitable work is, which basically means to assimilate within white culture, because anything outside of white culture in terms of behavior or appearance is just unacceptable, and could be considered, we wouldn't necessarily say savage, we would say unacceptable or aggressive, right? So that concept of colonialism is in the water of the systems that we live and work under, and we don't recognize that it is there, right? And
we're basically still doing it because of the conditioning of the of our ancestors, really. And
Absolutely.
It's perpetuated in today's day and age by what we have created in our societies.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things, if you go to if you go to Jamaica, for example, and you're in one of the tourist ports, you can see signs and clearly government produced materials about all the white leaders that bettered Jamaica, but you don't see anything about the actual Indigenous Black people that live there now, or the fact that they were brought there through the transatlantic slave trade. So it really is this brainwashing that white culture is superior, right? Particularly white male culture is superior. And yes, we still have really continued to buy into all of that. And I really think when we look at the different ways of moving forward and dismantling these structures, I think Resmaa Menakem has really done some interesting work about how the impacts of colonialism and anti-Black racism, have been baked into our DNA, right? Like we talk about intergenerational trauma, certainly from residential schools and from the slave trade and the prison industrial complex. But Resmaa Menakem, is really make sure that white people understand that this has happened to us as well. That the intergenerational impact of being the oppressors, of being the colonizers, has been passed down, through into our own DNA, and very much lives in our body on a very unconscious level. So when we talk about being raised in societies that are still very much colonial, yes, that's true. The conditioning is there, very much there, and but it also lives on a very somatic bodily level, and all of that really needs to be emancipated, and that inner work done to really be able to see those systems, how they're operating, in order to distance ourselves and then ultimately to dismantle them.
I noticed during COVID, I went and did a 24-hour silent retreat. And in order to do that, I just went to a hotel and booked a room. When I got to the hotel, of course, they had cups for the pens that you use. And so, I grabbed a pen out of the container that was for the clean one, and I signed the thing, and then I dropped it in the container for the dirty one.
Right.
And it was after I dropped it that I realized what I had done, because the white container was the clean pen and the black container was the dirty pens.
Right.
And I think for me, I was a little upset with myself that I hadn't noticed it quicker, but I'm grateful that I noticed it, because it's one of those subtle things where white is good, black is bad, white is clean, black is dirty. Like, I think there's all these little subtleties that we go, well, that's nothing. It's everything. It's so automatic that we're not even thinking about it. So in what other places are we responding from that automatic, because we've been trained this way? I mean, look at the Westerns of day. The good guy was wearing a white cowboy hat, and the bad guy was wearing black. Right? It's like we've taken that, and we've just sort of drilled it down into our consciousness to the place where we're not even aware of the ways in which we are causing other people harm.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if I can give an interesting example. So, we were working with a security company, and one of our staff members had come into the office after hours and, triggered the alarm. If you don't have your alarm code on you, it's very easy to do.
Yeah.
The security company came, and our staff member, who was a Black person, felt criminalized, right? Felt that they couldn't be believed as being, a staff member of the organization. Why are you here? That kind of thing. And the person got caught, didn't have their keys on, got caught, kind of in a stairwell type situation, and had no way of proving themselves, right? And this was our own company, that we had hired. And so then I had followed up with the security company and was telling them that this was the experience of our Black staff member. And, quite literally, the conversation that I had with the security company was that, I think, we were talking about the Caribbean, like, yeah, the Jamaicans are the nicest people that you could ever come across, but literally within the same breath, but you never want to be in a dark alley with them. Oh. I kid you not. And I was so, I said, well, this is exactly, the attitude that caused my Black staff member to feel like they were being criminalized going to their place of employment. And so, you're here to assure me that your staff get training, and yet, you as the owner and the proprietor of this business just drop that statement. So, it is very shocking how on the one hand, right, we think, no, that doesn't happen here. And on the other hand, oh, well, yeah, we have to be afraid of Black people. I think that is such an interesting message or such an interesting focus for white people to take a look at is the fear that we have of Black people and Black culture. It's very much there, and I mean, I can even say through my own workings, really seeing how we're taught that when we see one Black person, a group of Black people, that this is something that should trigger fear in us, right? Yeah. And when you look at all the race riots, they usually come down to a white woman feeling afraid. And of course, now, we've seen in recent times, like the woman in Central Park calling the police on the Black man who was, bird watching, and how this is baked in, and it's shocking. And at PWA, what I would say is we've seen an enormous increase of Black people at our organization. And I can tell you that our white community members are taken aback by it, because we've been taught that when you walk into a room and it's all Black people, that it's lower class, right? Like all the negative, pejorative things about it. There's,
Yeah.
we got to get out of here. There's something that we could be in danger, or there's something very degraded about, something is only black, right? And this stuff really is so baked into us.
Yeah.
We don't examine how we are constantly triggered by this fear reaction of black people in white culture.
Right. We're so conditioned, right? Like you say, baked in, conditioned from when we're born, the families we grow up in, the communities we grow up in, the societies, the schools we go to, all of that just keeps baking, like you say, that recipe of racism.
I mean, I can remember I grew up in the United States, and I grew up outside of the city of Baltimore, which is known as being, a very predominantly black city. And, my parents would listen to the local news all during the dinner hour, and it was constantly about how violent black people are. So the background noise of my childhood was constantly saying that black people are dangerous. Black people are dangerous. Black people are dangerous. That was the message that I got bombarded on a daily basis.
And my message was Indigenous people are drunk and lazy.
Mm-hmm.
That was because I was in Calgary.
Right.
I don't think I met a black person until I was 20. So it was, it's a way that we tend to, if we can identify somebody else, then we want to blame, point fingers. Our life is rough because of you, rather than going within ourselves, going, what is it that I need, want, or desire? And can I see that all people want the same things? Really, we want to be loved, we want to be housed, we want to be fed and clothed, we want to work. I think the minute we sort of say anybody, this race is this or this race is that, or women are this or that, because we get that as well, that I think we have to check those boxes and go, just a minute, any generalization is probably a falsehood.
Yeah. So, I have a question, because I can see many people that I even know saying, well, I'm not a racist, right? I'm not a racist. So what would you say to them?
I would say that white people are so afraid of being called out for being a racist, right? That it really prevents us from fully understanding how we might, in fact, be perpetuating racism. And I would say, from what I've learned, that white people who think that they are racially just and have a level of race consciousness are probably some of the worst offenders in perpetuating racism. So, I having that in the background of my mind, but I think when folks say, I'm not a racist, I don't see color, right? Like what I've been taught is that if you come out really strong and aggressive, pushing back on that, that in part is having a colonial response, right? And what I've been taught is that you can't expect in an interaction like that for the person to have a complete 180. What you really want to do is to create seeds of curiosity and doubt and some of their long-held belief. Because if you go on the offensive and say, well, yes, you are, you're just not aware of it, then that's a reality they don't even want to look at. And ultimately, you're just reinforcing the racist culture that we're in. So, I'm not saying that I'm an expert in this by any means, but I think it really is being very thoughtful about when folks feel that way, how you engage with them, and knowing that it is kind of the longue durée. We at PWA work with an elder by the name of Cosmore Marriott, and he is he's been an elder recognized in the West African tradition of Dagara, and what he said to me recently, he said, even just saying the phrase dismantling anti-Black racism, he's like, there's so much aggression in that. And as soon as folks hear that's what we're trying to do, like immediately it's like, oh boy, am I going to get, called out for being a racist. So, there's so much of the centering of oneself in that discourse. And, you really have to think about a way of broaching that disarms and breaks that down. And I can say for my own self that, as a white person who really had their eyes open after George Floyd was murdered in a way that I never had before. I have certainly made those mistakes of coming out really strong and hard against other white people. And, I really regret it. It really, I think, has done a great disservice. And so it is something that, you have to be really skillful and finessing about how to broach thoughtfully.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like walking a fine line, right? It's interesting because you said something, and I feel like I was one of those people at one time. I've taken the time to learn more, to read more. I've done, anti-racism work with diverse people to want to understand. And I remember many years ago saying to a Black woman who I really liked that I don't see color. And she stopped me in my tracks. She said, "Then you don't see me." I'm getting goosebumps right now. And I was like, oh my gosh.
It's a favorite phrase of many white people.
I'm still getting goosebumps, like my hair, because I never realized. I'm saying to her, I don't see us as being different. She's interpreting it as you don't see me, right? And I am different, and you're not acknowledging that. And so that was probably one of the first steps, and it was way before the Floyd incident that I started realizing the harm that I'm unconsciously doing without knowing it.
Right.
And so, and that's my passion for wanting to learn more, to understand more, to be able to do more. And so for me, when somebody says that I'm not racist, I would say to them, well, I used to think that too, right? I never realized just how the things that I said in ignorance were just so damaging and so harmful. So, I think that's important. It's important that we take those steps. And Suzanne, you spoke earlier about, starting within. That's where we've got to start.
Yeah.
And we know that in New Thought teachings, in our spiritualism, that's where it starts. It's all from within, living inside out instead of outside in. Right.
Exactly right.
Yeah, and taking that responsibility for learning and understanding and not doing harm in this world.
Yeah, and it's hard to avoid doing all harm, and I think that's the challenge, that people have decided that if I'm racist, that means I'm bad. And really, what racism means is that, I may be racist. That doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It could mean that I just don't understand somebody else. But if I was open to learning, I could begin to change some of the things I do inadvertently, like you said, Carol, where you cause harm by just not knowing. I mean, for me, I was raised in a white city with white family, with white friends, with everyone white at my school. And that's what I knew, right? All this white stuff. And one of the things that my parents did, and I did with my little children, is I called my little babies monkeys.
Oh, when I do that with my grandchildren.
Yeah, of course. And that's something that we as white people do, but don't do it with a black baby. And when we moved here, I started volunteering at the time it was called Jesse's Center for Teens. Now it's the Judy Colwell Center. So I was volunteering there, and one of the ministers who came with me was also volunteering there, another woman from Alberta. she was working with the babies, playing with the babies, and looking after while the girls were, taking classes or whatever. Then
Mhm.
she would work with the children. And one person overheard her call a baby a monkey. Well, that raised, like, I got called in
Mm.
by the going, like, is she a racist? Like, what's going on? I said, no, just white people from a white city with white background, and we call our babies lovingly monkeys.
We don't have the time for this because I would want to challenge that. A monkey is an animal. Why are we associating it with a black person?
Well, that's the thing, is she wasn't.
Right, exactly.
All
That's
little babies are, but
so. Are we
there's
saying that's
been,
in society? That's what it means? Because I don't know that one.
oh, okay. So society here, one of the digs is about calling black people monkeys or apes or whatever. That is a slam.
Yeah.
And so it was a big issue. She just didn't know. I knew.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not sure why I knew, but I did. And
Mhm.
so when I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh,
Right.
Bonnie, but she doesn't have a racist bone in her body.
No.
Well, but she has her that bias that we just don't know,
Mm.
Yeah.
right? Because we've been
Yeah.
raised in a certain way, we live in that way, we think the
Yeah.
way we're doing it is right. We're not meaning to do harm,
Yeah.
but harm we are doing.
Yeah.
So now we're down to our last 4 minutes. Uh, so, Suzanne, our favorite question is, what is the one thing you would like people to take away from this conversation? If there was one thing.
Sure. Yeah. That, I mean, I will circle back to HIV, right? And to say that people living with HIV have been forgotten largely in our society. And, how this circles back is that the intersectionality of Black people living with HIV and the increasing rates of Black people, Black women, queer men becoming HIV positive, is now exacerbated by the anti-Black racism systems that we have. So, people really need to be aware that HIV still is very much a matter of life and death and impacted by different intersectionalities of lived experience. And, as we're moving forward in this world and thinking about how to protect ourselves and to have a just society, it's really the acknowledgement that people living with HIV are very much with us. And we need to make sure that they have the medical care and supports that they need, and also to think about how dismantling anti-Black racism directly impacts their health and well-being.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Cheryl, final
Well,
thoughts?
I just want to say thank you to Suzanne for the work you do and for your organization. Wish there were more like them. I just want to encourage people to not be so judgmental, to be kinder, to be more curious, and on all sides. Let's try and understand each other more instead of being afraid of each other.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And for me, I'm going to sneeze.
On the truth.
Ugh. Anyway,
You know that saying, you sneeze on the truth?
sneeze on the truth. That's it. I just want to say thank you, Suzanne. The work you do is remarkable, and PWA is a remarkable organization. I'm so grateful for it, and for my willingness to learn a new way of being, which is what I've been doing for years. And my hope is that people will start to recognize that each one of us brings something of value, and instead of worrying about what a newcomer coming in, is taking from me, how about we begin to see the benefit of what newcomers are bringing to us, and let us work together to support the well-being of all. And let's not forget HIV, because it's still a thing, and
Yeah.
it needs to be handled.
So
Thank you for being
quickly, before we go, how can people support your organization, Suzanne?
Well, if you go to www.pwatoronto.org, We have a donate page there, and we're just about to come up on World AIDS Day on December 1st, which is the time when the world actually does reflect to some extent on the fact that the AIDS epidemic might have receded in the 80s and 90s, but HIV is still very much a reality for millions of people around the world. So it's a wonderful time to support people living with HIV. Please go to our website and donate so that we can continue to offer the food, financial assistance, and all around practical supports for the betterment and health and well-being of people living with HIV.
Wonderful.
Yes. And
Thank
on that note, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Deja, in the background. Thank you, Suzanne. You are truly a gift. And for those of you watching, please do like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you donate to ntmedia.org and to pwa.org, pwatoronto.org. And we'll be back again next week. So be sure to join us again. Thanks for watching. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.